Welcome to Dan's Talks. My guest today is Eric Woodward, one of the great prominent architects in the Hamptons who's designed some of the huge mansions in recent years that decorate our ocean fronts and around. And I'm a great admirer of his work. And more recently, he's become a traveler by bike around the country. And I'd like to talk to him about that for a little while. But let's begin. I'd like to ask you how you got interested when you were younger in becoming an architect. Where are you from, and how did you decide that's what you wanted to do as a career?
Okay, well, thank you, Dan, for inviting me. How I was inspired to be an architect. I was born in Belmont, Massachusetts, and my mother was a renegade. Her family was from Flushing and then Bridgehampton, and my uncle was an architect, and my grandfather was an architect. And so I looked up to both of them. They were role models. They were both neat guys, and I liked what they did. My father was a scientist, my mother was an artist, so architecture sort of combines those two things well. And they were both they were both wonderful people. So when it came time to decide what to do, I thought, okay, well, let me try architecture.
Where did you study?
Went to Syracuse,
And
which from Belmont was like going out west.
yes, so
The guidance counselor at my high school said, "Where's that? Is that somewhere after the Hudson?"
Buffalo, near Buffalo, right?
Yeah, but I enjoyed it very much. I did my fifth year, the final year of the program in London, and had a lot of fun there.
Well, that certainly must have been an inspiration for much of the work as out here with these great mansions are English designs
Some
and
of them have English roots, yes.
colonial. Most of what you've done that I've ever seen, and some of these homes are 15 bedrooms and larger, or on 30 acres and more, are done as the in that style. And I wanted to, how did you come out to the Hamptons? This was where you've done most of your work, I think.
Yeah, right. I came right out of school. It was 1976, and my uncle had moved his practice from Manhattan to Southampton, and he needed help, and so I had a job right away. I was also interested in photography, and I thought, okay, here's the choice, life choice. Maybe I should become a photographer, and it was a lot easier to take the architecture route. So
I didn't want to ask you to make any names, but I thought it might be interesting to ask if there were people who were either difficult or had interesting things to say, or interesting parts of the architecture that came to be built that you could talk to us about.
sure. Well, one interesting client was Rune Arledge, and Rune was head of ABC Sports.
Yep.
He was a groundbreaker at the Olympics about how to get cameras in interesting places and really bring the sports alive. Then he went to ABC News, but as a client, he was quite forceful, but he never wanted to commit himself. It was always as if we were designing a set, and the set could be struck and rebuilt the next day. And he didn't realize that the house was going to be permanent. And if we decided that we were putting the kitchen over there, it was going to be over there. But we did get the house done. It was a success. He was very happy with it. So.
Where is it, and what town? And
That's in Southampton. It's just east of the village, and oceanfront, beautiful site, etc.
um, What's the largest home you've ever designed out here?
Well, it's sort of a tie, and one was a renovation, and that was in Southampton Village, right on Gin Lane. It was a client that it was actually the second job. The first job we did with this client was a Gene Futterman construction on the ocean, and he sold that. The way it goes, he sold it for twice what he spent on the property, and he bought up to Gin Lane in Southampton. It was one of the big giant estates there called By the Way, and so we did a pretty significant renovation. Put a swimming pool inside underneath the living room in the basement. Well, it was sort of high above ground, so it wasn't totally basement. That was quite a trick to do with the giant old colonial house sort of teetering above this swimming pool excavation. But as you said, in terms of size, that was big. And then the Cranberry Dune property in East Hampton that you mentioned, that's the largest new house that I've done. And I've got to correct you. I haven't actually done that many of houses of that size. Well, that's the biggest. And I haven't done a lot of the hugest. There's so many now that those two jobs of mine sort of pale in comparison.
What else are all the projects you've done been residential?
With Gene Futterman, when we 1986, when I was starting out with him, we did a horse farm, which was a lot of fun because we went down to Kentucky, and we had some connections to get some tours. Met one of everybody was in awe of this racehorse that we were able to say hello to, and learned a good deal about what horses want. They had a farm manager who was helping the designs, and he said they want air, they want to breathe. People coop them up in barns. It wants airflow through the barns. But that's the most non-residential I've done.
How many do you take on several projects a year when you were?
Oh, when things were really going, there could be 10 or 12 active projects at once. Some in the design phase, some in the construction phase. It was quite a juggling act.
You have an office in Southampton, I think.
Right. My office was in Southampton, and for many years, about half of my workload was for Michael Davis, and he tried to have 3 or 4 houses underway at all times, and he would continually bring more clients or sites into the office, and there was never a shortage of things to do. I had 5 employees, and everybody would be working hard, so we got a lot of work done.
What was the favorite project you've ever done that you're maybe perhaps most proud of?
Oh, well, it's a little like the scene out of the musical Oklahoma. The young woman was she had a few boyfriends, every handsome guy in town, and her father, I think it was at one point, said, "Okay, who is it? Who's your favorite? You really got to, you got to pick your favorite." And she'd say, "Oh, it's the one I'm with." So it's
I guess that makes
architecture. You focus on what you're doing, and you get really involved. It's actually a hazard of architects to fall in love with what you're doing, sometimes to the exclusion of the quality of the project. You think it's so great, and you don't notice that maybe there are things you could be doing better. But certainly my own house was definitely a favorite in terms of I was able to, with my wife and myself, really exercise our visions and tailor it to our lifestyle, and it's a little different from most of my jobs are shingle style, and that's more of what the local vernacular is, shingle style houses.
Yeah.
Our house was a 1928 cabin in the woods,
Oh,
and so we totally new interior. We kept the outside, but enlarged up and down.
what's your favorite rooms or views in the house that you think are so special? I can tell you those in my house. So in fact, you've seen them. So what is in your house that's thrills you?
Well, it's interesting. We had it was built as a one-room playhouse, 30 by 40 feet. So the interior was totally open. We could design from scratch an appropriate interior, and put we had a design with the kitchen sort of off to the side, and then a dining room, and then a living room. And the day before the carpenters were going to arrive to start laying the walls, my wife said, "Wait a minute, we don't want to have that sort of traditional layout like that." And we decided to put the kitchen in the very center of the house. So, and this was 1982. The open plan, life centers around the kitchen was somewhat of a novel thing at that point. So from the kitchen, the center of the kitchen, you have a view toward the fireplace, toward the dining room, toward a little bathroom, a first floor bathroom, toward what we call a kid lounge, and toward a breakfast nook. So the whole thing revolves around the person in the kitchen being in the power location for the house.
It's quite unique in that way.
It's worked. We're still here, however many years later.
And you've become very interested in, I guess, seeing the country by bike, which is kind of amazing to me as a non-athletic person.
Uh-huh.
What was the cause of your decision to you and your wife to head off like that?
We like bicycling. It was a common interest. With couples, there's some things that you'd like to do together, which it's important to pursue. So, we have two daughters, and they had, when graduating high school, the older one said, or a couple of years into college, I guess she said, "Dad, we want to ride our bikes across country." And we sort of gulped and said, "Okay." And so they did it first.
Oh,
they went from Southampton to San Diego, and not to be outdone, let's see, it was exactly 10 years ago now. My wife and I decided, okay, we're going to do it, and we better do it now before we get old and cranky. So we did it from Anacortes, which is in Washington, heading home from there, what they call the Northern Tier route. There's routes laid out all over the country by the Adventure Cycling Organization.
Oh.
So we follow a route, and it turned out it really wasn't. It seems ahead of time like monumental. How do you do it? How do you get over the Rockies? How do you get across the plains?
Right.
But it was just every day you'd wake up and it was another 30, 40, 50-mile bike ride, which is sort of normal for bicycle, people who like biking. That's not too bad. We picked the lowest spot in the Continental Divide to.
Where is that?
It was east of Missoula in Montana. The peak, the highest point going over, is only 5,200 feet above sea level.
It's about 10,000 feet lower than Pikes.
Yeah. There are a lot of other routes across the Rockies where you really have to pedal hard.
Did you feel different about things when you came back? Did it change you to do this?
Well, I had to sort of recover a few things job-wise that it.
How long did it take?
We spent 4 months, which is leisurely compared to what a lot of people, they only have a certain amount of time in their lives, and they have to go like 100 miles a day. And so we'd meet people like that on the route. And in contrast, we were averaging 50 miles a day when we got into the swing of it.
What are the standouts from that trip that come to mind that you was special?
Certainly Glacier Park was pretty special as a location. Another thing that's just special in retrospect is to think of how many towns there are in this country. In Montana alone, we stayed for the night in 24 different towns.
Wow.
The elite Easterner viewpoint is, oh, Montana's empty. There probably aren't even 24 towns in the whole state, but no, they keep coming along one after the other. And we'd pull into we had camping equipment. We were ready because there were some stretches where there weren't places to stay without camping. So we were ready to camp, but we ended up only camping in 12 out of the 100 nights that we spent. So
it's sort of like Travels with Charlie, but
yeah.
And also you suggested we talk about Austin Herrick because you've become interested in history as well as these other things.
Yeah, a lot of my time now is researching, and so during COVID, I decided I want to find out more about my wife's great grandfather, I guess. 1830s or so was when he lived, and he was a whaler. And the family used to say, "Oh, our whaling captain ancestor, Austin Herrick," and so I went to years ago. I went to Sag Harbor Library and Historical Museum and said, "I want to find out about Austin Herrick." And they looked. No record of a Captain Herrick sailing out of Sag Harbor. And I thought, is this a family myth that he was an esteemed captain, as he'd been created out of fantasies? But no, it turned out as I did more research that he did exist, and he did have some interesting episodes in his life. And he sailed out of Lynn, Massachusetts, and out of Norwich, Connecticut, and that's why the Sag Harbor didn't have records of him. There was a story about a Southampton captain getting shipwrecked in Brazil, and the family said this was Austin Herrick, and I couldn't find any information about that for quite a few years, and then finally did find two corroborating newspaper accounts. Interestingly, one from Brooklyn and one from the Midwest somewhere, about a ship that was shipwrecked in Brazil, and Herrick was listed as one of the survivors. So great, he does have a proud history. So we did a blog with the history museum that's on YouTube if people are interested to look it up.
Where would one find that?
YouTube, who is Austin Herrick?
Because the Herricks are one of the prominent founding families going back to 1650s and 1640s even.
Yeah, a little later. So they weren't on the first boat or the second boat or the third boat, but maybe 1670 or something.
Yeah,
it's a big family tree.
He lived during the era when slavery ended in the Eastern Long Island, what there was of it.
Yes.
That must have been very interesting. Are you working now? You had mentioned you're sort of semi-retired, I'm told, and
yes, I'm 90% retired. I've got one client left who we're still working on some permits, and I didn't want to abandon them until the permits were in.
Well, tell me about that project without naming him or some aspect of it to give us an idea of how it works here.
Well, life's a big circle. It's the big job you were referring to originally, that I did in East Hampton, and now it's children of my original client who are still interested in improving their situation there. 27 acres and not enough room for all of the extended family now. They need more. So
I was just remembering something I thought you might, an architectural story. It happened about 20 years, oh, not that, 2008.
mhm.
The financial business sort of collapsed, and there was a big mansion built by one of the principals in Southampton, not in Southampton, in Wall Street, who lost his company and his job and hadn't moved in yet. And he wound up having to sell it to a man he had fired. And he tore this house down that was never lived in, that was, 30,000 square feet, and built his own different house on the property in the end. I guess you missed that, but
that I wasn't involved in that, but having lots of money does not necessarily bring you sense when it comes to what you want to build or live in or spend money on. There's a lot of people with more money than sense.
That's very true. Well, thanks for being on the podcast. I really appreciate talking to you and learning. Enjoyed watching your career over all these years, and some of the tales of the architectural tales told about different projects out here are extraordinary. I had heard, just in telling you this, I think someone was lying to me. When long ago, when I was first out here in like in the 70s or back earlier, I was in Southampton in the what was then called the social set, section of the town. Yep. And they were telling me that a lot of the mansions that had been built around 1900 had been abandoned and needed to be torn down because the taxes wouldn't have to be paid if that were done. Yeah. And that there was one man who they named, I forget the name though, who they said could estimate the distance you'd have to be from it when you dynamited the house correctly.
That's an interesting, I haven't heard that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I used to hear a lot of stuff like that. Anyway, say hello to your wife for me, and yes. See you soon.
You too.
Podcast. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.